Paul McCartney has written more than his fair share of classic songs. Alongside John Lennon, Paul, now 82, wrote the bulk of the Beatles songbook and was the driving force behind beloved tracks like Let It Be, Yesterday, Hey Jude, and Penny Lane. About the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership, Music and Musicians magazine's Wilfred Mellers wrote in 1972, "Opposite poles generate electricity. Between John and Paul the sparks flew." John's fiery iconoclasm was tempered by Paul's lyrical grace, while Paul's wide-eyed charm was toughened by John's resilience. Paul and John set the standard for songwriting in the 1960s, inspiring many of their peers. About their 1964 arrival in the United States, Bob Dylan said, "They were doing things nobody was doing. Their chords were outrageous, just outrageous, and their harmonies made it all valid. But I just kept it to myself that I really dug them. Everybody else thought they were for the teeny boppers, that they were going to pass right away. But it was obvious to me that they had staying power. I knew they were pointing the direction of where music had to go." It wasn't just Dylan who they inspired and led the way for. John and Paul even famously wrote the Rolling Stones' first hit single for them, 1963's I Wanna Be Your Man. However, that inspiration would also flow both ways. John was a fan of Dylan and said he had his own Dylan period while in the Beatles. And there was one 1960s band in particular that Paul was effusive in his praise of. Paul told the Ronnie would show that the Beatles were in friendly competition with the Beach Boys. He said, "Brian Wilson sort of proved himself to be a really amazing composer. I was into chords and harmonies and stuff at that time, and we ended up with kind of like a rivalry. We put a song out and Brian would hear it, and then he'd do one. Which is nice. It's like me and John. You know, you kind of try and top each other all the time." According to music writer Ian MacDonald, the Beatles saw the Californian band's 1966 album, Pet Sounds, as the most impressive of their contemporaries from that year. Brian Wilson had written that album in response to the Fab Four's 1965 album, Rubber Soul. There is one song of the Beach Boys that Paul finds particularly moving. He told BBC Radio 1 in 2007, "God Only Knows is one of the few songs that reduces me to tears every time I hear it. It's really just a love song, but it's brilliantly done. It shows the genius of Brian. I've actually performed it with him, and I'm afraid to say that during the sound check I broke down."